This story was told to me by my father when I was a child. The Great Patriotic War had ended, and my bosom friend Vaska and I, like our whole village, rejoiced at the peaceful days that had come. My father returned from the war and worked as a blacksmith in the village forge, my mother worked on a collective farm, my grandmother managed the house and household, a Russian oven, cabbage soup, fish pies, a cart of caviar and potatoes. My friend Vaska lived outside the village, with his mother and grandfather Ignat Lukic, his mother's father. Vaska's father did not return from the front, as many children did then. So this very grandfather Lukic was our greatest mentor and teacher. And he drove Vaska and me for long suspicious absences, but also taught us life, knowledge of nature and everyday life, tried to instill in us work skills. Knowledge was difficult for us, skills were also not very good, but Keach did not lose patience and all the time repeated to us the educational phrases, "You can't pull a fish out of the pond without difficulty, teaching is light, not teaching is darkness." Our parents had no time to deal with our upbringing. They worked a lot on the collective farm to feed the family, and we were on our own. My father was grumbling. "That's when you're needed, you'll never be found. Where are you and your boyfriend always hanging around, steaming you with the rain sometime?" Our favorite hobby was to walk through the surrounding forests in search of cartridges from aircraft guns. We played war games and shot at cans. We needed gunpowder, and gunpowder could only be obtained from cartridges, so we needed cartridges very much. Our parents scolded us a lot for this, so we tried to do our business as secretly as possible. But it didn't always work out secretly, and our ears were often fluttered by an adult hand, but this didn't stop us much. Our village was spared the war. The front was 100 kilometers away, but in the neighboring village across the river upstream there was a Soviet military airfield throughout the war. From there, during the war, fighters and heavy bombers flew in, which flew to bomb German positions and military depots to the front line. Our most cherished desire with Vaska was to find a plane that fell into a swamp during the war while flying on a mission. The planes were making a farewell circle over the airfield, but one day something did not dock, and two fighters collided in the air. One of them had the whole cabin blown apart by a propeller, and the pilot was killed. The plane crashed into the ground near the airfield. The second one had his tail cut off, and he planned a swamp called Nettle. It was relatively close to our village, so we went in search of it every day, like young trackers. Every time he was in the woods and approaching the village, Vaska would say, "Oh, we're going to get hurt now from our moms." And I laughed every time. "Where did you get that word from, Vazia, maman?" Grandfather Lukic was the first to meet us with a belt at the ready, forever the first to protect us in front of our parents. "Look, it's an educational moment," my grandfather said, shaking the belt in front of our noses. Then he coughed loudly twice and hung the instrument of education on a nail in a prominent place. One day, my friend and I wandered through the forest for a long time in search of bullets. It's not an easy task, you need to look under all the bumps and fir trees, stir up the leaves and fallen branches. But we couldn't find the plane in any way. Although we knew approximately where he fell, maybe it was completely sucked into the swamp, or maybe it didn't exist at all, and it was a beautiful legend. My friend and I didn't know. The forests were thick, the swamp was hot, and there was little experience, and not much courage, but we were not discouraged. In childish fun, they stubbornly strove for their goal. After wandering a little more through the forest and finding nothing, we wandered into a dense thicket of bushes. There we noticed a hole under a tree root that had been torn out during the storm. The pit was covered with abundant deadwood, similar to a burrow. "Probably someone's house," I said to Vaska. "Yes, it looks like it," the friend replied. "Let's get closer and take a look. It's scary, but maybe there's a lynx, and even worse, a wolf." But childish curiosity knows no fear, and we slowly began to approach the hole. When we looked into the pit, for attentive eyes were looking at us. "These are cubs." Vaska pulled me by the sleeve, and we, like with urine, rushed to run away from the wolf's lair. We came to the village quiet and scared, and agreed with each other not to tell anyone about the forest incident. Even my grandfather. The next day, without any agreement, our feet brought us to the cubs by themselves. So, stealthily, hiding behind hummocks, we sat near the hole for a couple of days in ambush, according to all the signs that our grandfather taught us. We realized that the cubs were alone. Something had happened to their mother. She did not come to the burrow. The cubs began to whine and cry quietly. My friend and I felt so sorry for the kids that we completely forgot about airplanes and cartridges. Now we were only interested in the cubs. Vaska stole milk from the house, and I went to the market. The mother was perplexed. "What have you built? Did you start loving milk?" I've never noticed this before, not having time to fill the jug. But Grandfather Lukich also began to suspect something. You can't fool him, the old partisan. I had to tell my grandfather about the forest find. "So that's what carries you around the woods all day long," said the grandfather. "Go and see what kind of cubs are there." "Oh, yes," the grandfather scratched his head, "that's it. You can't tell village peasants, it's dangerous, but it's not human to leave living souls to disappear. It's not human. So my grandfather began to help take care of the kids. For the sake of secrecy, we agreed that only Vaska and I would go to the forest. My father will be a scientific consultant. He will tell me what to do and how to go out into the cubs, but not tame them to humans. Let the beasts remain the beasts. And so they did. When the cubs grew up, Vaska and I received a command from my grandfather not to approach the den anymore. That we argued for a long time, but my grandfather said no, flatly, and took our honest pioneer word from us. Vaska and I had to submit to his male authority. How many times my friend and I wanted to go to our pets, but our word of honor stopped us. A year has passed since then. The summer was dry, there was little water in the river, the heated air floated in waves over the fields. The dryness was terrible. It hasn't rained for 2 months. Fires often broke out in the area, but, thank God, they were quickly extinguished. People lived in full tension and readiness to fight the fire. Firefighting ditches were dug around the village and in the forest. Water supplies were made, equipment and inventory were checked. One night, the village was awakened by a terrible and prolonged howl. Dogs barked hysterically, screams and fuss arose. The sky at the edge of the village was illuminated with a bright red-orange glow. The old Riga was blazing on a hillock near the river. In such terrible dryness, the fire could quickly reach the village, and then there would be trouble. The wooden buildings will inevitably be taken away by fire. There is nothing worse than a fire for a village hut. Everyone understood that. The villagers rushed to put out the fire with the whole world. Everyone was running. Everything is mixed up in this desperate battle of man with fire. Luke's grandfather was able to knock on the rail. "Fire! Fire!" he shouted in an almost hoarse voice. Women with buckets, men with shovels and bags, everyone rushed to extinguish the fire from young to old, even the elderly and children. The men brought a mobile pump, and it went. Vaska and I also put out the fire together with the whole village. The fire was extinguished about 4 hours later. Old Riga burned to the ground, but the village was saved by the whole world. The people, tired and dirty, covered in soot, ashes and earth, began to disperse to their homes. Grandfather was squatting and wiping his forehead with his palm. He beckoned us to him with his finger, and Vaska and I sat down next to him. "Do you know?" my grandfather asked quietly, almost in a whisper, "who woke up the village, who raised a howl and woke up all the dogs? And who is it?" Vaska and I looked at my grandfather in surprise. They were wolves. What wolves? Vaska and I were surprised. Grandfather, what are you saying? In the evening I walked around the yard, and it seemed to me to old Soslep that I saw two wolf silhouettes against the background of some incomprehensible night glow on a hillock. A chill ran down my spine, and then suddenly there was a long drawn-out howl, with a howl. Dogs don't howl like that, I know for sure. Our dogs immediately picked up this song and howled in all the yards. Then I realized that Riga was on fire and he ran to the rail to call the people. Yes, they were our wolves. The cubs that we saved in the forest last summer. And now they have saved us from a terrible disaster. That's how, guys, there are lives. But you never tell anyone about it. Grandfather put his finger to his lips. This is our secret. If you liked it, please like and subscribe to the channel. All the best to you.